Hello everyone, I've just created a short video that is hopefully going to help you when analysing language in literature. So I'm going to talk you through how to create a quote explosion. Now you may have heard this term before, you may not have, but I'm hoping by the end of this video you will be more confident and comfortable when analysing a quote. So the first thing to think about when looking at a quote is that we need to try to say a lot about a little. Now, when choosing your quote, it's important to mention that we should be choosing quotes that are quite short and to the point. You should not be choosing quotes and copying out chunks of text. We should be picking quotes that are within 7 to 10 words. So try and be selective with the quotes you choose and what you have to say about them. It's also worth noting that when you are copying down your quotes, you are copying them down accurately, making sure you are spelling correctly, using the correct punctuation that have been used in the quote, and also making sure you are using quotation marks around the quote you've chosen. So I'm hopefully going to show you how to say a lot about a short quote. So on the slide now, you're going to see quite a lot of questions and thinking points for you to be able to consider when analysing a quote. Now, you might not be able to answer all of these questions depending on the quote you are looking at. However, we should be trying to think about and consider answers for the majority of them. So the first thing you need to think about when you look at a quote is who is saying the quote. Has this quote come from the character you are analysing? Is it a different character within the text? Is it the narrator that's saying the quote? Or could this quote have come from a stage direction if you are analysing a play? It's really important to consider this because depending on where the quote has come from might determine how you understand that quote. Okay, the next thing to think about is, does this particular quote link to another character within the text? Does this quote inform your understanding of a character better? Or does it help with the relationship of another character within the text? You might find that the quote doesn't link to another character, and this is fine also. We need to know, what does the quote mean? What does this quote suggest? And why have you chosen it to back up your point? So what does that quote mean? What does that quote mean, essentially? What is the effect of the quote on the audience? So does this particular quote make the audience feel a certain way? Does it change the audience's view of a character? Does it make them have a particular impression? Or does it make them feel sympathy for the character, for example? So what effect does that particular quote have on your audience or your reader? What does the quote tell you about the events in the text? So it's important when looking at a quote, we need to be looking at it in reference to the full text, not just on its own. So does this quote inform your understanding of the rest of the text? Can you link this quote to anywhere else in the text that you are looking at? What does this quote show about the character? So does the quote help your understanding of the character? Does it teach you something new about the character or represent them in a particular way? Also, you could be looking at the quote to see if there are any language techniques the writer has used. Now, it's worth mentioning that we're not there to feature spot. If you notice the quote is using a simile, talk about the simile being used, but we need to be analysing it. It's not enough just to say the writer has used a simile. So please make sure we are feature spotting and looking for language techniques within the quote, but we do need to be saying something about them. So going on from that, can you pick out any particular words within the quote and zoom in on them and talk about them in a bit more detail? Looking at maybe the connotations of a word in more depth and thinking about what words you recognise as being important in understanding that quote. And lastly, can you link this quote to your understanding of the context of the time this text was written. So you might not always be able to do that, but it's important to try and consider if this quote informs your understanding of the text any better, and whether you can link it to the context, the background information of the text. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you an example of doing this, where I have considered these questions, and it's helped me analyse my quote in a lot of depth. So the quote I've chosen to look at today is a quote from Of Mice and Men. It's the part of the text when the author is talking about Curly's wife and how she is presented to the men in the ranch. So the quote is, "Her fingernails were red, her hair hung in little rolled clusters like sausages." I'm going to talk you through now how I have analysed this quote in quite a lot of detail. What we are seeing with quite a lot of students at school is that they are taking this quote for examples and then just stating the obvious. For example, a student might say, "Her fingernails were red. This suggests she's wearing red nail polish." What we need to be doing is unpicking the language further and looking at the connotations and the meanings around words to help develop our analysis of the quote. So the first thing I considered was that this quote, I know from my context and understanding of the novel, that Curly's wife is the only female character who is featured in the text. So this particular quote could suggest how women were perceived in this time period. Due to Curly's wife wearing nail polish and putting quite a lot of time into her appearance, it suggests that women were perceived as someone to be viewed and admired rather than actual people within that context. I also spoke about how, by looking at the language, this quote teaches me that it presents Curly's wife as a bit of a tart. She's trying really hard to impress the men because she feels so lonely on the ranch, and we can see that through her eagerness to impress the men through wearing red nail polish and taking time to take care of her hair and present herself to the men. In terms of how an audience might be affected by this quote, personally, I feel sympathy towards Curly's wife, as I think the men objectify her, meaning they see her as an object, and only value her for her looks. Now, I can see this quite clearly within the quote, as the writer, John Steinbeck, has focused quite heavily on her appearance. Her fingernails and her hair are both considered to be quite important and of value to Curly's wife. So in terms of how the men view Curly's wife, to the men on the ranch, she represents trouble. She's always trying to impress the men, and she comes across as a tease because she always seems to be flirting. Now, this again I got from the quote due to her determination and eagerness to impress the men with her appearance. So now I looked at the language techniques used within this quote, and I focused on the simile, hair hung in little rolled clusters like sausages. And what I said was that this simile suggests and reinforces how the men, including Curly as well, look at her as a piece of meat. She's a sexual object and nothing more. She's not valued as a person within the text. She's valued as an object, which again links back to context of the time this text was written. Okay, so then I looked closer at the language and I chose to zoom in on the word red. And I said that this colour has quite a lot of connotations. One connotation it has is danger. And this could link to the fact that the men on the ranch see her as a dangerous character and they're worried she could get them in trouble. And lastly, linking this quote to context, I know from my knowledge of this time period, and if you've studied of mice and men, or you may know stuff about the 1930s, women were not seen as equal to men. And Curly's wife in this quote represents that inequality. She's viewed merely for her looks and her appearance, and it is quite clear that she takes a lot of pride in how she looks, as that is the only value or her only way to gain attention from the men on the ranch. Okay, so I'll now want you to have a go at pausing the video, have a look at the quote I've chosen for you, and work your way through the questions, trying to talk about this quote in as much detail as you possibly can. There is a worksheet that you can use to do this, so please use that to aid you in doing this. If you are not familiar with Of Mice and Men, that doesn't matter. Try and have a go at analysing the quote in as much detail as you can, just based on the words you've got in front of you. I would start by working through the quote word by word and seeing what it suggests and if you can analyse it in a lot of detail. For people unsure about the quote and Of Mice and Men, this is still referring to Curly's wife, and it talks about a character who is looking at Curly's wife in the text. Please pause the video, have a go at analysing this quote in as much detail as you can, and then restart the video and your teacher can talk through what it is you've done. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the video. I am hoping it has been of some use. I know it's been a lot of information at once and it can seem quite daunting, but the message I'm trying to get across is that we should be talking a lot about a short quote. We should be zooming in on keywords, picking up on language techniques and thinking about the effects this quote has on an audience. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and I am hoping to see lots of quote explosions in your English lessons. Thank you very much.